The house stood in silence, the kind that feels heavier than a scream. Arthur Preston stood in the doorway, his suitcase filled with dirty laundry and secrets, expecting the usual chaos of post-Christmas cleanup. He expected his wife Lydia to be tired but welcoming. He expected his son Leo to run down the hall. Instead, he found a void. The furniture was there, but the life was gone. And on the kitchen counter sat a single thick envelope. It wasn't a divorce petition, not yet. It was something far worse. It was a legal decree stating that while Arthur was sipping champagne in Aspen with his mistress, his wife hadn't just left him. She had legally erased his name from their son's life. The flight from Aspen to Chicago had been turbulent, but Arthur Preston hardly noticed. His mind was still wrapped in the lingering scent of Sophie's perfume, Chanel No. 5, distinct and cloying, and the adrenaline of a week spent living a double life. To his wife Lydia, he had been on a high-stakes consulting trip in Denver, putting out fires for a client that didn't exist. To Sophie, he was the conquering hero, the man who spared no expense. He pulled his black Range Rover into the driveway of his suburban home. It was December 27th. The neighborhood was still draped in festive lights, inflatable snowmen bobbing in the freezing wind. But the Preston house was dark. Arthur checked his watch. 7:15 p.m. Lydia should have been home. She usually had dinner ready, something warm, likely a roast, to welcome him back from the grueling work trip. Leo, their 4-year-old, should have been bathed and in pajamas, playing with the mountain of toys Arthur had guilt-bought him before leaving. He killed the engine. He reached into his pocket, checking for the velvet box, a diamond tennis bracelet he'd bought for Lydia at the airport duty-free to assuage his conscience. It was the "I'm sorry I missed Christmas morning" tax. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside. "Lydia, Leo, Daddy's home." His voice echoed, bouncing off the hardwood floors with an unnatural sharpness. The air in the house was stale cold. The heating had been turned off. Arthur frowned, dropping his suitcase by the stairs. "Lydia." He walked into the living room and froze. The 12-foot Christmas tree which he had helped decorate 3 weeks ago was gone. Not just taken down and packed away, gone. There were no needles on the floor, no stray tinsel. The mantel, usually crowded with stockings and framed photos of their family vacations to Martha's Vineyard and Lake Como, was bare. Panic, cold and prickly, began to crawl up the back of his neck. He ran up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. He burst into Leo's room. The race car bed was stripped of its bedding. The shelves were empty. The toy chest was open and hollow. "No, no, no," Arthur muttered, his breath hitching. He turned and sprinted to the master bedroom. He flung the closet doors open. His suits were there. His shoes were lined up perfectly. His watch collection was untouched on the dresser. But Lydia's side, it was a vacuum. Her dresses, her coats, her shoes vanished. The jewelry box he had given her for their 5th anniversary was gone. She hadn't just packed a bag, she had moved out. Arthur grabbed his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed Lydia's number. "The number you have reached is no longer in service." He stared at the screen. That was impossible. He paid the bill. He dialed again. Same message. He dialed the landline of his mother-in-law, a woman who had never liked him. It rang and rang until the voicemail picked up. Arthur stood in the center of the dark bedroom, the silence pressing in on him. He felt a sudden surge of anger. How dare she? He had been gone for 5 days. 5 days. How could someone dismantle an entire life in 5 days? He went back downstairs, needing a drink. He walked into the kitchen, reaching for the cabinet where he kept the scotch. That's when he saw it. On the marble kitchen island, illuminated by the harsh light of the refrigerator he had just opened, lay a large manila envelope. Next to it was his wedding ring. Not Lydia's ring. His ring. He hadn't even realized he wasn't wearing it. He had taken it off in Aspen, placing it in the safe of the hotel room he shared with Sophie. He must have left it there and... No. He looked closer. It wasn't the ring he left in Aspen. It was a duplicate. Lydia had bought him a cheap silicone band for the gym years ago. This was the gold band he thought was in his DOP kit. He picked up the envelope. It was heavy. He tore it open, his hands shaking so badly he ripped the top page. It wasn't a handwritten letter. It wasn't a tear-stained note asking why. It was a legal document. State of Illinois, County of Cook. Decree of change of name. Minor. Arthur's eyes scanned the document, trying to make sense of the legalese. He saw his son's name, Leo Arthur Preston. But there was a line through it. Below it, in bold-typed letters, new, legal name, Leo James Bennett. Bennett, Lydia's maiden name. She hadn't just left him. She had scrubbed his name off their son. Arthur dropped the paper as if it were burning his skin. Bennett, he whispered, the sound harsh in the empty kitchen. You can't do that. I didn't sign anything. He scrambled to pick the papers up again, flipping to the second page. There was a signature at the bottom. Arthur Preston. He squinted. It looked like his signature. It flowed with the same arrogance, the same sharp loop on the P. But he hadn't signed this. He had been in Aspen. Unless... He remembered the stack of documents Lydia had put in front of him 3 weeks ago. Tax forms, she had said. Something about the trust fund for Leo transferring assets to a new high-yield account. He had been busy, distracted, texting Sophie under the dinner table. He had signed where she pointed, trusting her efficiency because Lydia was always efficient. Lydia was the one who handled the boring details, so he could be the visionary. You played me, Arthur hissed. You cold-hearted. He flipped further. Behind the name change decree was a letter. This one was on the letterhead of Henderson, Tate & Associates, the most ruthless family law firm in the city. Arthur read the cover letter. Mr. Preston. Please be advised that my client Lydia Bennett, formerly Preston, has vacated the marital residence as of December 24th. Enclosed, you will find the executed deed poll for the minor child, Leo James Bennett. As you consented to this change via notarized affidavit on December 10th, the change has been processed and filed. Furthermore, you are hereby notified that Mrs. Bennett has filed for immediate dissolution of marriage on the grounds of adultery. We have taken the liberty of freezing the joint assets pending the preliminary hearing. Regarding your visitation rights, Mrs. Bennett requests that all communication go through this office. Do not attempt to contact her or the minor child directly. A restraining order is being prepared should you violate this request. Regards, Jeffrey Henderson. Arthur slammed his fist onto the marble counter. The pain shot up his arm, grounding him. Adultery, he shouted at the empty room. She has no proof. He was careful. He was always careful. He used a burner phone. He paid for hotels in cash or through a shell company he used for consulting expenses. Sophie knew the rules: no social media, no photos together. He grabbed his main phone and opened his banking app. He needed to see the damage. He logged in. Joint checking 12 on 42s. Joint savings $500. He swiped to his personal account. Arthur Preston. Personal $45,000. Okay. He wasn't destitute. He still had his personal savings. He still had the business account. He logged into the business portal for Preston and Partners. Access denied. Arthur blinked. He retyped his password. Access denied. Contact administrator. I am the administrator, he yelled. He called his business partner Roger. Roger had been his college roommate, his best friend. Surely Roger would explain this glitch. The phone rang twice before Roger picked up. Arthur, Roger said. His voice was flat, unfriendly. Roger, what the hell is going on? I can't get into the business account. And Lydia has lost her mind. She emptied the house. She didn't lose her mind, Art, Roger said. She found the receipts. Arthur froze. What receipts? The Aspen Chalet, the jewelry store in Denver, the flights for Sophie Laurent. Arthur's blood ran cold. I expense those as client entertainment, you know that. Lydia came to the office, Arthur. On Christmas Eve. She brought a forensic accountant. What? She proved you were embezzling company funds to pay for your affair, Roger said, his voice dripping with disgust. You used the corporate card for personal travel. That's fraud, Arthur. We had an emergency board meeting yesterday morning. You can't have a meeting without me. We did. Under the morality clause of your contract, which Lydia's lawyer kindly pointed out to us, we voted to remove you, effective immediately. Roger, listen to me. You're out, Art. And honestly, after what you did to her, don't call me again. The line went dead. Arthur stood in the silent kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound. He was fired. He was broke. His wife was gone. His son's name was changed, and it had all happened while he was ordering room service with Sophie. Arthur sank onto the floor, his back against the dishwasher. He needed to think. He needed a strategy. How did she find out? That was the question nagging at him. He had been so careful. He thought back to the weeks leading up to Christmas. Lydia had been quieter than usual, yes, but he attributed that to the stress of the holidays. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't checked his phone. She had been compliant. She had even encouraged him to go on the trip. Go. Arthur, she had said, smoothing his lapel. The client needs you. We'll celebrate Christmas when you get back. I'll make sure everything is perfect. Perfect, he muttered bitterly. He looked at the pile of papers again. Underneath the legal documents there was a small red envelope. It looked like a Christmas card. He hadn't noticed it before. It was tucked inside the back flap of the manila envelope. He pulled it out. On the front, in Lydia's elegant cursive, it read, "To Arthur, the only gift you deserve." He opened it. Inside was a photograph. It was grainy, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. It was Arthur and Sophie standing outside a cafe in the city 3 months ago. Arthur was touching Sophie's cheek. Sophie was laughing. Turned over, the back of the photo had a date and a location written on it. And below that, a short message. She approached me in October, Arthur. She wanted to know if I would sell the house. She said she was your fiancé. She didn't know who I was. Arthur's mouth fell open. Sophie. Sophie had approached Lydia. He read on. I didn't tell her I was your wife. I told her I was the real estate agent. She told me everything, Arthur. She showed me the ring you promised her. She told me about the Aspen trip before you even booked it. She thought she was bragging to a stranger. She gave me the timeline. She gave me the ammunition. Arthur felt sick. Sophie hadn't just been a mistress. She had been a liability, a loose cannon. And Lydia had played the long game. She had listened to his mistress brag about their affair, posing as a stranger, gathering evidence, plotting the exact moment to pull the trigger. She had waited until Christmas. She waited until he was out of the state, trapped in a snowstorm in Aspen, to execute the plan. She had him sign the name change papers under the guise of tax forms. She had the forensic accountant ready for the business accounts. She had the movers scheduled for Christmas Day. Arthur stood up, adrenaline replacing the shock. He had to find them. He had to fix this. He couldn't let her take Leo. He couldn't let his son grow up a Bennett. He grabbed his car keys. He knew where she would go. Her sister's place in Wisconsin. It was a 3-hour drive, but he would make it in 2. He ran out the door, leaving the legal papers scattered on the floor. He jumped into the Range Rover and hit the ignition button. Click. Nothing. He pressed it again. Click. 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 The dashboard lit up with a message: remote immobilization active. Contact leasing provider. No, Arthur groaned, hitting the steering wheel. No. The car was leased through the company, Preston and Partners. Roger had cut off the car. Arthur sat in the freezing leather seat, trapped in his own driveway. He looked up at the house, dark, empty, and silent. His phone buzzed. A text message. It was from Sophie. Artie, baby. I'm at the apartment. My key isn't working, and the doorman says I'm not on the list anymore. What's going on? Arthur stared at the phone. He started to type to explain to tell her to wait, but then he stopped. Sophie was the reason he was here. Sophie's big mouth. Sophie's arrogance. He deleted the text draft. He looked at the contact name, Sophie Aspen. He blocked the number. For the first time in his life, Arthur Preston was entirely alone. But the night was far from over. He had one card left to play Lydia's weakness, or at least what he thought was her weakness. He got out of the car and walked into the cold night air. He would call the police. He would report a kidnapping. He would turn this war nuclear. He dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? My wife. Arthur said, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and fake fear. She's taken my son. She's unstable. The squad car arrived 20 minutes later, its lights cutting through the darkness of the suburban street. 2 officers stepped out. Officer Miller, a burly man with a mustache, and Officer Davis, a younger woman with a sharp gaze. Arthur met them at the door, putting on his best performance of the distraught father. Thank God you're here, Arthur said, ushering them into the empty hallway. I came home from a business trip and everything is gone. My wife, my son, the furniture. She's vanished. Officer Miller looked around the empty living room. Is there a custody agreement in place? Mr. Preston? No, we are married. Happily married. Or so I thought. She just took him. And you believe the child is in danger? Officer Davis asked, her pen poised over her notebook. Yes, Arthur lied. She's been acting erratic lately. Paranoiac. I'm terrified she might hurt herself or Leo. Officer Davis narrowed her eyes. Mr. Preston, usually when a spouse leaves like this, it's planned. Did she leave a note? Arthur hesitated. If he showed them the legal papers, they would know this was a civil matter, not a police one. They would leave. No, Arthur said. Nothing. Officer Miller radioed dispatch. Dispatch, we have a possible domestic abduction. Can you run a trace on a Lydia Preston? The radio crackled back a moment later. Officer, be advised. We have a flag on this address from earlier today. A welfare check was filed by a Lydia Bennett against an Arthur Preston. Arthur's heart stopped. Officer Miller looked at Arthur, his demeanor shifting from sympathetic to suspicious. Mr. Preston, did you say her name was Lydia Preston? Yes, that's her married name. Dispatch, Miller said. Go ahead with the details on the welfare check. The dispatcher's voice was tinny but clear in the silent hallway. Subject Lydia Bennett contacted the station at 0800 hours. Stated she was fleeing the marital home due to emotional abuse and infidelity. She provided a forwarding address to the station and filed a formal safety plan. She also stated that the husband, Arthur Preston, might attempt to file a false missing persons report upon his return. The silence that followed was deafening. Officer Davis closed her notebook. Mr. Preston, it seems your wife and child are not missing. Law enforcement knows where they are. She has made contact. She stole my son, Arthur shouted, the facade cracking. She changed his name without my permission. That sounds like a civil matter for the court, sir, Miller said, stepping back toward the door. Since she has established contact and reported her safety, we cannot treat this as a kidnapping. Filing a false police report, however, is a crime. I didn't... You said she left no note, Davis pointed out, looking at the kitchen island where the torn envelope still lay visible. But I see paperwork right there. Arthur clenched his jaw. Lydia had checkmated him again. She had predicted he would call the police. She had preempted his kidnapping narrative by reporting herself safe before he even landed in Chicago. Have a good night, Mr. Preston, Miller said. I suggest you call a lawyer. The door clicked shut. Arthur was vibrating with rage. He needed a lawyer. But he couldn't afford Henderson, Tate and Associates. He couldn't afford his usual guys. He had to go to the one person he knew would help him no matter what, his mother Beatrice. Arthur didn't call an Uber. He walked 3 miles in the freezing sleet to the commuter train station, then took the late train into the city heading for the Gold Coast. He arrived at his mother's penthouse just before midnight. Beatrice Preston was not a woman who tolerated unannounced guests, even her own son. But when she saw Arthur soaking wet, shivering, and looking like a beaten dog, she didn't offer a hug. She simply opened the door wide enough for him to slip in her face, a mask of disappointment. "You look hideous, Arthur," she said, tightening the sash of her silk robe. "I assume this has something to do with that dreadful wife of yours." Arthur collapsed onto the vintage velvet sofa in her sitting room. "She left me, Mother. She took Leo, and she changed his name." Beatrice, who had been pouring herself a glass of water from a crystal carafe, froze. She turned slowly, her eyes narrowing. "She did what? She changed his name," Arthur repeated, his voice cracking. "She tricked me into signing a consent form. Leo is now legally a Bennett." The glass shattered in Beatrice's hand. She didn't flinch as the shards hit the Persian rug. The water soaked into the wool, but her attention was entirely on her son. "A Bennett!" She spat, the name tasting like poison in her mouth. "That washerwoman's name. My grandson is the heir to the Preston legacy. He is not a Bennett." "She filed for divorce," Arthur mumbled, head in his hands. "She knows about Aspen." Beatrice waved her hand dismissively. "Men have mistresses, Arthur. Your father had 3. I didn't leave him. I didn't steal his children. Lydia is weak, but stealing the name, that is an act of war." Beatrice walked over to her mahogany desk and picked up her phone. She didn't call the police. She dialed a number from memory. "Wake him up," she commanded into the receiver. "I don't care what time it is. Tell Sebastian Cole that Beatrice Preston needs him in court tomorrow morning. We are filing an emergency injunction." She hung up and looked at Arthur with cold, hard eyes. "You are a fool, Arthur. You let a woman outsmart you. But you are lucky you are my son. We will not just get custody, we will crush her. We will bury her in so much litigation she won't be able to afford a pack of gum, let alone a lawyer." "I was fired, Mother." Arthur confessed, the shame burning his throat. "Roger kicked me out. They say I embezzled funds." Beatrice's expression didn't change. "Roger is a parasite. I'll buy his shares by noon. Stop crying. Go shower. Tomorrow we remind Lydia Bennett who we are." Arthur felt a flicker of hope. He had forgotten the sheer terrifying force of nature that was his mother. Lydia had plans, yes, but Lydia didn't have the Preston fortune. Or so he thought. The next morning, Arthur sat in the plush leather chair of Cole, Sterling and Partners. No, wait, Sterling is banned. Let's use Cole, Mercer and Associates. Sebastian Cole, a man who looked more like a shark in a suit than a human being, reviewed the documents Arthur had salvaged from the kitchen floor. "The name change is technically legal if you sign the affidavit," Cole said, his voice smooth and disinterested. "However, if we can prove fraud, that she misrepresented the document, we can have it overturned. The divorce is messier. Illinois is a no-fault state, but the asset division—" Cole paused, looking at his tablet. He frowned. "Mr. Preston, did you transfer the deed to the lake house in October?" "No," Arthur said. "Why?" "Because according to the county clerk, the Preston Lake House is now the property of a limited liability company called New Leaf Holdings." Arthur blinked. "I never signed that." "The signature is notarized," Cole said, sliding the tablet across the desk. Arthur looked. It was his signature. Again. And then he remembered. The night of his birthday. Lydia had organized a surprise party. He had been drunk, very drunk. She had laughed, joking about signing insurance papers for the boat while he was in a good mood. He had signed a stack of things, laughing along with her. "She was planning this for months," Arthur whispered. "Since October." "She's liquidated the assets you held jointly," Cole said, tapping the screen. "And because she moved the funds into trusts for the child, they are untouchable during the divorce proceedings." "She hasn't stolen the money, Arthur. She's locked it away for Leo. You can't touch a cent." Beatrice, sitting in the corner, slammed her cane against the floor. "I don't care about the lake house. Get the boy back. Get the name back." "We have a hearing scheduled for Friday," Cole said. "But be warned. Lydia's lawyer is Jeffrey Henderson. He's the only man in this city I'm afraid of." The days leading up to the hearing were a blur of rage and whiskey. Arthur was staying in his mother's guest room, feeling like a teenager again, grounded and powerless. He tried to call Sophie. He needed an ally. He needed her to testify that Lydia had harassed her, that Lydia was the crazy one. He unblocked her number and dialed. "Hello?" Sophie's voice was icy. "Sophie, it's Arthur. Look, I can explain everything. Lydia set us up." "You lied to me, Artie," Sophie said. "You said you were the CEO. You said you were worth 10 million. I am. Well, I will be, my mother. I saw the news, Arthur. Preston and Partners is suing you for corporate theft. It's on page 6. Arthur froze. "What? And guess who called me?" Sophie continued. "Lydia's lawyer, Mr. Henderson. He was very nice. He told me that the diamond bracelet you gave me, the one you said was vintage Cartier." Arthur swallowed hard. "Sophie? It's a fake, Arthur. It's cubic zirconia. Lydia had the appraisal slips. You charged the real one to the company card, returned it, kept the cash, and gave me a knockoff." "That's not true. I'm testifying, Arthur." Sophie spat. "For her. I'm handing over every text, every email, every receipt where you promised to leave her. You wasted my time. You made me look like a fool. I hope she takes you for everything." The line went dead. Arthur stared at the phone. He hadn't bought a fake. He had bought the real one. He remembered the receipt. Wait. He had bought the bracelet in Denver. He had left it in his briefcase. Lydia had access to his briefcase. She must have swapped it. She must have returned the real one, bought a fake, and planted the receipt. She was dismantling him piece by piece, turning everyone he knew into a weapon against him. On Thursday night, Arthur received a notification on his phone. It was a Google alert he had set up for his own name years ago. Disgraced consultant Arthur Preston, accused of Ponzi scheme involvement. He clicked the link. It was a business blog, but a reputable one. The article detailed how Preston and Partners had been funneling money into offshore accounts. Arthur read the text, his breath coming in short gasps. The article claimed Arthur was the mastermind. It cited anonymous sources. "Roger," Arthur hissed. Roger was pinning the company's dirty laundry on him. While Arthur was distracted with his divorce, Roger was framing him for years of financial malpractice. And Lydia had timed her exit perfectly to avoid the fallout. By changing Leo's name to Bennett, she wasn't just spiting Arthur. She was disassociating her son from a man who was about to become a pariah. It wasn't just a breakup. It was a rescue mission. The courtroom was sterile, smelling of lemon polish and stale coffee. Judge Harriet Walters presided. She was known as the hangman in family court circles. She had zero patience for theatrics. Arthur sat beside Sebastian Cole. He wore his best navy suit, but it felt loose on him. He had lost 10 pounds in a week. On the other side of the aisle sat Lydia. She looked incredible. She wasn't wearing the dowdy sweater she used to wear at home. She wore a sharp cream-colored suit that made her look like a CEO. Her hair was cut into a sleek bob. She didn't look at Arthur. She looked straight ahead. Next to her sat Jeffrey Henderson, a man with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Calling the matter of Preston v. Bennett," the bailiff announced. Sebastian Cole stood up. "Your Honor, we are here to file an emergency motion to restore the legal name of the minor child Leo Preston. The name change was obtained through fraudulent means. My client was misled into signing the documents." Judge Walters peered over her glasses. "Fraud is a serious accusation, Mr. Cole. Do you have proof?" "Mr. Preston will testify that he believed he was signing tax documents. And yet—" Henderson stood up, his voice booming. "Mr. Preston is a seasoned business consultant, a man who reads contracts for a living. Are we to believe he signs legal decrees without reading the bold title at the top? He was under duress, Cole argued. He was trusting his wife. Trusting, Henderson scoffed. This is a man who was at the very moment he signed those papers booking a suite at the St. Regis in Aspen for his mistress. Let's not talk about trust, Mr. Cole. The judge suppressed a smirk. Continue, Mr. Henderson. Your Honor, Henderson said, walking toward the bench. The name change was not done out of spite. It was done for the safety and well-being of the child. The name Preston is currently trending on Twitter, and not for good reasons. The Department of Justice opened an investigation into Mr. Preston this morning. A murmur went through the courtroom. Arthur's head snapped up. DOJ. We are submitting into evidence the indictment filed against Arthur Preston for wire fraud and embezzlement, Henderson said, slapping a thick folder onto the judge's bench. If the boy keeps the name Preston, he will be bullied, harassed, and associated with a federal crime. Lydia Bennett changed the name to protect her son's future. It was a maternal act of shielding the innocent. Arthur stood up. That's a lie. Roger did it. I didn't steal anything. Sit down, Mr. Preston, Judge Walters barked. She opened the folder. She read the summary. She looked at Arthur, then at Lydia. Mr. Cole, the judge said calmly, given the high-profile nature of these criminal allegations, I am inclined to agree with the respondent. It is in the best interest of the child to distance himself from the volatility of the father's current situation. But the Preston legacy, Beatrice shouted from the gallery. We built this city. Bailiff, remove that woman, Judge Walters said without looking up. As Beatrice was escorted out screaming about her lawyers, Arthur felt the room spinning. However, the judge continued, I will not grant full custody to Ms. Bennett solely based on an indictment. Innocent until proven guilty. We will move to temporary visitation. Your Honor, Lydia spoke for the first time. Her voice was clear, melodic. May I speak? Briefly, Ms. Bennett. Lydia turned to look at Arthur. For the first time their eyes met. Her eyes weren't angry. They were pitying. I don't want to deny Arthur visitation, she said. I want him to see Leo. But I have one condition. Which is, the judge asked. He cannot introduce Leo to anyone he is romantically involved with, and he must submit to a paternity test. The room went silent. Arthur's jaw dropped. What Leo is my son? He looks just like me. Does he? Lydia asked softly. Or does he look like Roger? The air was sucked out of the room. Arthur's mind reeled. Roger had been around a lot when they were trying to conceive. Roger and Lydia had always been friendly. Too friendly. This is preposterous, Cole shouted. She is trying to emotionally destroy my client. If he is the father, Henderson interjected smoothly, he has nothing to fear from a simple swab. Unless, of course, Mr. Preston's fertility issues, which are documented in his medical records, were more severe than he told his family. Arthur looked at Lydia. She was smiling. A small, sad smile. It was a bluff. It had to be a bluff. She was planting a seed of doubt to destroy his relationship with his own son, to make him question the one thing he was sure of. But then he looked at Roger, who had just slipped into the back of the courtroom to watch the proceedings. Roger met his eyes and winked. Arthur felt a scream building in his chest. I'll take the test, Arthur said, his voice trembling. I'll take the damn test, and when it proves he's mine, I'm going to take him away from you forever. Order! Judge Walters banged her gavel. Paternity test ordered. Hearing adjourned until results are in. Next Tuesday. The hallway outside courtroom 4B was a tunnel of sterile light and suffocating silence. It was Tuesday Judgment Day. The air smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. Arthur Preston sat on the hard wooden bench, his knees bouncing with a nervous, uncontrollable rhythm that echoed off the marble walls. Beside him sat his mother Beatrice. She was a statue carved from ice and old money. Her gloved hands clutched her crocodile skin handbag with a grip that turned her knuckles white, but her face remained impassive. She hadn't spoken a single word to him since they left her penthouse that morning. The threat, however, hung heavy in the air between them, louder than any scream. If the boy isn't a Preston, the money stops. The lawyers leave. The protection evaporates. Beatrice Preston did not pay for mistakes, and she certainly did not pay for bastards. The heavy oak doors creaked open. The bailiff, a man who looked like he'd seen too many broken families to care, signaled them in. "All parties for Preston v. Bennett," he droned. Arthur stood his legs, feeling like jelly. He walked into the arena. Lydia was already seated at the plaintiff's table. She looked maddeningly serene, wearing a cream-colored suit that caught the light, making her look almost ethereal against the drab backdrop of the court. She didn't turn to look at him. She stared straight ahead, her posture perfect, her hands folded over a notepad. Beside her, Jeffrey Henderson, the shark in the pinstripe suit, shuffled papers with a rhythmic snick, snick, snick. Arthur glanced toward the back of the courtroom. There in the gallery sat Roger Davis. Roger was leaning back, one arm draped over the empty seat next to him, a smirk playing on his lips. He had come to watch the demolition. He expected Arthur to be humiliated. He expected the DNA test to confirm his own twisted victory over Arthur's life. He met Arthur's gaze and offered a small, mocking salute. Arthur felt a surge of bile rise in his throat, but Sebastian Cole, his lawyer, grabbed his elbow. "Sit down, Arthur. Don't look at him." "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Harriet Walters swept into the room, her black robes billowing. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and picked up a single sealed envelope that lay in the center of her bench. The sound of the judge tearing the paper strip seemed to deafen the room. "Rip!" Arthur stopped breathing. The world narrowed down to the piece of paper in the judge's hand. "We have received the results from the genetic testing laboratory regarding the paternity of the minor child Leo James Bennett." Judge Walters stated, her voice devoid of emotion. She scanned the document for an agonizingly long moment, her brow furrowing slightly. Arthur gripped the edge of the table until his fingers ached. "Please. Please." "The probability of paternity for Arthur Preston," the judge read, looking up and locking eyes with Arthur, "is 99.99%. The air rushed back into Arthur's lungs in a ragged, audible sob. He slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. "He's mine." He choked out, the relief washing over him like a tidal wave. "I told you, he's mine." He couldn't help it. He whipped his head around to look at the gallery. The smug smile had vanished from Roger's face, replaced by a slack-jawed flicker of confusion. For a moment, Roger looked small. He had truly believed his own lie, or perhaps in his jealousy, he had simply prayed for it to be true. "Quiet in the court," Judge Walters ordered, banging her gavel once. "This confirms paternity. Mr. Preston is the biological father." "Your Honor," Jeffrey Henderson stood up immediately. His voice was smooth, commanding the room's attention. "My client acknowledges the results. We formally withdraw the contest to paternity. However, we have a new emergency motion to submit regarding the custody arrangement." Sebastian Cole shot up. "On what grounds my client is the confirmed biological father?" "He has rights. We move for immediate restoration of the surname Preston and joint custody." "We object on the grounds," Henderson said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly serious, "that as of 9:00 a.m. this morning, Arthur Preston has been designated a cooperating witness in an active federal investigation." The room went deadly silent. Even the hum of the ventilation system seemed to stop. Arthur blinked, dazed. "I'm a what?" Henderson turned not to the judge, but to face Arthur directly. "You didn't know, did you, Mr. Preston? You thought my client was just angry. You thought she was just a scorned wife leaving with the silverware." Henderson walked around the table holding a small flash drive up for the court to see. Lydia Bennett didn't just leave you on Christmas Eve. She didn't just change your son's name to hurt you. She spent the last 6 months gathering audio files from your home office, specifically from the smart speakers and the security system you installed but never monitored. Arthur felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him cold and dizzy. The Alexa, the Google Home in the study, the high-end security system he had bragged about to his friends. She has recordings, Henderson continued, his voice ringing off the walls, of a Mr. Roger Davis discussing the alteration of the company ledgers with you in the room. We have hours of tape. In those recordings, you, Mr. Preston, explicitly object to the fraud. You are heard saying, "Roger, we can't do this, it's prison time." You are heard trying to stop it. Arthur was stunned. He remembered that argument. It was late October. It was raining. He had told Roger it was too risky, that they were cooking the books too hot. He hadn't stopped it. He was too weak, too greedy, but he had argued against it. "Why is this relevant to family court?" Judge Walters asked sharply. "Because Henderson said Mrs. Bennett turned those tapes over to the FBI yesterday afternoon. She secured a deal. She provided the evidence that exonerates Arthur Preston of the embezzlement and wire fraud charges and places the entire burden of guilt on the architect of the scheme." Henderson pointed a finger toward the back of the courtroom. "Mr. Roger Davis." In the back row, Roger Davis scrambled to his feet. Panic, raw and animalistic, contorted his face. He looked at the exit, then at the judge, then at the 2 uniformed officers who had quietly stepped out from the shadows near the door. "This is a setup!" Roger screamed, his voice cracking. "She's lying!" Roger bolted. He leaped over the railing, making a desperate dash for the side exit. "Bailiff, stop him!" Judge Walter shouted. The chaos was instant. The 2 officers intercepted Roger before he made it 5 feet. One tackled him, driving him into the carpet with a heavy thud. Roger thrashed, screaming obscenities, blaming Arthur, blaming Lydia, blaming the world, until the click of handcuffs silenced his flailing arms. As Roger was dragged out of the courtroom, heaving and broken, Arthur sat frozen. He looked across the aisle at Lydia. She met his gaze. Her expression hadn't changed. She wasn't smiling. She looked tired. She had saved him. She held the evidence that could have sent him to prison as an accomplice. He had signed the papers after all. But she had curated the evidence. She had selected the specific tapes that proved his hesitation, his reluctance. She had handed the FBI Roger's head on a platter to save the father of her child. "Why?" Arthur whispered the word, barely forming on his lips. Lydia stood up. She addressed the judge, ignoring Arthur's question. "Your Honor, Arthur is not a criminal. He is a fool. He is a narcissist and an adulterer, but he is not a thief. However," she paused, letting the weight of her next words settle, "he is also destitute." "Objection," Cole stammered. "The Preston family has—" "The Preston family has nothing," Lydia cut in, her voice like steel. "The IRS and the SEC seized the Preston and Partners business accounts this morning to begin restitution for the investors Roger defrauded. The personal accounts are frozen. Even the family trust is under audit." Beatrice Preston let out a strangled gasp. She clutched her chest, her composure finally shattering. "My money! You let them touch my money!" Lydia turned to her mother-in-law. "The audit covers the entire estate, Beatrice. It will take years to untangle. In the meantime, Arthur has no home. He has no income. He has no means to support a child." She opened her leather briefcase and pulled out a final, thick document. "I am offering a settlement," Lydia said calmly. "I have accepted a position as a director of operations in London. I am moving there with Leo next week. Arthur will grant me full physical custody. He will allow the name Bennett to remain. Leo needs a clean slate away from the scandal of the Preston name." "And if I refuse?" Arthur asked, his voice trembling. "I'm the father. I have rights." Lydia looked down at him. There was no pity in her eyes anymore, only business. "In exchange for your signature," she said softly, I will not release the other tape. Arthur froze. What other tape? Lydia slid a small silver USB drive across the mahogany table. It spun and stopped right in front of Arthur's hands. The one from Aspen, Lydia said. The one Sophie recorded on her phone during your pillow talk. She sold it to me for $10,000 when she realized the bracelet you gave her was a fake. Arthur felt the blood drain from his face. What is on it? It's the recording from Christmas Eve, Lydia said, her voice clear enough for Beatrice to hear. The one where you are drunk on champagne. The one where you call your mother a tyrant witch. The one where you detail quite graphically exactly how you plan to declare her mentally incompetent and put her in a state-run nursing home the moment you get power of attorney so you can liquidate her penthouse. The silence that followed was absolute. Arthur couldn't breathe. He slowly turned his head to the right. Beatrice was staring at him. Her eyes were wide, glassy, and terrifyingly empty. Mother, Arthur stammered, reaching out a hand. I was drunk. I was showing off for Sophie. I didn't mean it. You know I didn't mean it. Beatrice stood up. She smoothed the wrinkles of her skirt with agonizing precision. She picked up her handbag. You are on your own, Arthur, she said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was dead. Do not contact me. Do not come to the penthouse. Security has already been instructed to bar your entry. You are disinherited, effective immediately. She turned and walked out of the courtroom, the click of her heels sounding like nails being driven into a coffin. She didn't look back. Arthur was alone. Truly, completely alone. The deal, Arthur? Lydia said softly. Sign the custody papers. Let Leo go. You can visit in the summers. You can Zoom every week. But he lives with me. He is a Bennett. And you stay here and rebuild your mess. Arthur looked at the papers. He looked at the door where his mother had vanished. He looked at the empty spot where Roger had been arrested. He realized then that Lydia hadn't just changed the locks. She had dismantled his entire reality. She had stripped him of his arrogance, his fortune, his business, his mistress, and his mother. But she had kept him out of prison. It was the final act of a wife who once loved him a mercy kill. She had burned his life down so he could survive the ashes. He picked up the pen. His hand shook, but he pressed the tip to the paper. He signed, Arthur Preston. It was the last time that name would hold any power over his son. 6 months later. The coffee shop in downtown Chicago was crowded with the morning rush. The espresso machine hissed, masking the sound of the freezing rain battering the windows. Arthur wiped the counter, tossing the dirty rag into the sanitizer bin. He wore a green apron. His name tag read simply, Arthur. Order for table 4, he called out, placing a latte on the pickup ledge. It was a humble job. It paid the rent on his studio apartment in a neighborhood he used to refuse to drive through. It was hard work. It was honest work. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He checked the time. It was his break. He stepped into the back alley, sheltering under the awning from the rain. He accepted the FaceTime request. Leo's face filled the screen, bright and chaotic. He was wearing a gray school blazer with a crest Arthur didn't recognize. He looked happy. He looked healthy. Hi, Dad, Leo chirped, bringing the camera indistinguishably close to his face. Look, I lost a tooth. Arthur smiled, a genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, something he hadn't felt in years. Wow, look at that gap. Did the tooth fairy come? Yeah. Mum said she gave me extra pounds because it was a big one. And we went to the park and I saw a squirrel, but the squirrels here are different. Lydia appeared in the background. She was wearing a trench coat, holding an umbrella. She looked younger, lighter. The tension that used to live in her jaw was gone. She looked at the camera. Her eyes were polite, distant, but no longer cold. Say goodbye, Leo, she said gently. We have to catch the bus to the museum. Bye, Dad. Love you. Love you too, buddy. Be good. I will. The screen went black. Arthur stood in the rainy alleyway staring at his reflection in the dark phone screen. He looked older. He looked tired. He had lost the empire. He had lost the name. He had lost the luxury. But he wasn't in a cell. He wasn't living a lie. He put his phone in his pocket, took a deep breath of the cold, wet air, and turned back toward the door. "Hey, Arthur," his manager yelled from inside. "We need more milk up front." "Coming," Arthur shouted back. He walked back inside to work. And that is the story of how Arthur Preston lost everything to gain the only thing that mattered, the truth. It is a terrifying reminder that while betraying a partner might seem easy in the heat of the moment, you never truly know who you are sleeping next to. Lydia Bennett played the long game. She didn't scream, she didn't fight, she calculated. She dismantled his life with the surgical precision of a master strategist, proving that the most dangerous person in the room is often the quietest. Arthur lost his fortune, his reputation, and his mother's conditional love. But in the end, Lydia gave him a clean slate, a hard, lonely slate, but a clean one. What do you think? Did Arthur get off too easy? Was Lydia a hero for saving him from prison, or a villain for weaponizing his son's name? And would you have signed those papers? If you enjoyed this story of revenge, betrayal, and twisted justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a drama. Comment Team Lydia or Team Arthur below to let me know whose side you're on. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.